Hi, this is ChaYah Shalom. And I thought I would just go on here and maybe talk about presentation or the way that we want to come across. I know that I'm not in some studio with full-on makeup and the hair all perfect and all that good stuff. That's not the point that I'm trying to make. I'm talking about our character and how we function. And I thought maybe it would be good if I go into, let me see if I can share screen. It might end up to be, I don't know, my Facebook for right now. Everything is off the cuff here with me. It's not like, yeah, I am talking about presentation, but I'm going to go with Blue Letter Bible. Okay. Yeah, sometimes we have a thought and we just go with it, right? And I thought about this for a second. Have you guys ever gone on Blue Letter Bible before? All right, so let me see if we got the book of Esther. Let's see if I can spell her name right. So right here, I kind of want to just gloss over this a little bit, but you guys ever heard the story about Queen Esther? So let's say let me just read a little bit and see if we can get the gist of what's going on here. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, this was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom, the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days, wow, in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars. And the couches were of gold and silver on mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king, in accordance with the law. Have we heard of language like that before? In accordance with the law. The drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal place which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded all these people, I'm not going to say their names, and 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. I think that she was not liking to be an object, to be shown off her beauty, how beautiful she was, and feeling used because of how beautiful she was. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, this was his wife, by the way, the queen, For this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice. Those closest to him, the 7 princes of Persia and Media who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom, what shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law, because she did not obey the command of the king Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs? And Memucan answered before the king and princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are all in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. So they're like trumping up all these charges against his wife, the queen, because she didn't want to become as an object, and be shown off, like as if this is what Miss America beauty pageant or something. Because they're saying, for the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes. When they report King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters. This is like letter of the law stuff right here. He sent letters to all the king's provinces and all king's men, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house and speak in the language of his own people. Okay. So do you guys kind of get a little picture there of what happened? The king of this great kingdom, he reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. And those eunuchs that he listened to were saying, hey, why don't you get your beautiful, look at all this great opulence of beautiful set design and all this. Let's get your wife who's had a makeup artist and her hair done and fashion galore and, prance her around like some object of beauty. This is exactly what they were saying. These are the eunuch guys. What up with the eunuch guys doing the fashion and all that stuff? Trying to get his wife to do that. And she's like, excuse me, hello, like I am not an object, for you to be like, She didn't like that. So she was like, no, I'm not going to get out there in front of everybody and just do it because, I'm so beautiful. Yeah, she obviously was beautiful. Okay. Let's go to the next chapter here for a second. Let's see if this works. So it says Esther becomes queen. So after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Excuse me. Then the king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, into the women's quarters under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. So some of the words that you're hearing, custodian, I want you to think, when you hear some of these words, when they appoint officers and custodians, I want you to think about these words. Okay, so it says, and let beauty preparations be given them So they're going to prepare those young virgins to be chosen to replace that other beautiful woman who was like, excuse me, I am not going to be like your little plaything object. Like, hello, you are objectifying me. Hello. Anyways, Esther chapter 2:4 says, then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. Whoa. Hello. I mean, who's coming up with these? This is the king's servants who attended to him. These are the like Pharisees or the, like, who's the servants of us right now? I want you to think about that. They're the ones coming up with these legislations and such to say, hey, here's a new rule. Let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. Dethrone that woman. This thing pleased the king. So this particular king, he's like, yeah, sounds good. Okay, cool. Yeah. So in Shushan, the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shammai, and the son of Kish, a Benjamite. So he's from the tribe of Benjamin. That was the last son of Jacob, who his name was turned to Israel. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, when many young women were gathered at Shushan, the citadel, under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor, so he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Cool. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or family, meaning she did not tell about her genealogy, what exactly kind of people, tribe that she came from. For Mordecai had charged her to not reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of that women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. That's her uncle. And he's like pacing, hoping everything is okay. So right here it says each young woman's turn came to go in to King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months preparation, according to the regulations for the women. For thus were the days of their preparation apportioned, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. In the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who kept the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. Now, when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Hegai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So she kind of listened to her advisors. It talks about Wisdom is listening to the multitude of counselors and not just doing whatever you want and disrespecting or acting, any way we feel or whatever, and disrespecting people or what have you. So apparently it looks like the king loved Esther more than all the other women. So she won that contest, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. So then we find out that Mordecai, her uncle, is discovering a plot. When virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat with the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai, that's her uncle. Do not reveal what your nationality is or this or that. Do not mention anything. As when she was brought up by him, she obeyed him. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, listen to that, the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on gallows. And it was written in the book of Chronicles in the presence of the king. What's going on next? Let's go to the 3rd chapter and see what's happening. They made a report and they put it in their books. Esther chapter 3:1. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him, set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants, I still think of Humpty Dumpty when I hear all that. And all the king's servants, all the king's men, couldn't put Humpty Dumpty, who were within the king's gate, bowed and paid homage to Haman. For so the king had commanded concerning him, but Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command, Mordecai? Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman, to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the 1st month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur, that is the lot, before Haman, to determine the day and the month, until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. Whoa. Can you imagine if you're practicing a certain kind of law, like consumer law, and you want to go into trust law, and then there's some decree put out that says, we're going to have to get rid of these people who want to practice trust law because we really just want to do commercial stuff. Can you imagine? That's terrible. So this is Haman saying, if it pleases the king, he's like a snake, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasuries. Can you believe that? He's literally bribing the king. Come on up. Come on up. To kill a whole nation of people. I mean, you know, that kind of sounds familiar. Doesn't that kind of sound familiar? I'm not going to say it, but I'm just saying, you guys, listen, read between the lines. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you to do with them as it seems good to you. Can you believe that? That's horrible. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus, it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers by the U.S. Postal Service. No, not really. Into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, to plunder their possessions. Yeah, because they're going to kill them and they're going to get all their stuff too. They're like, you're worth more dead than you are alive. Where have we heard that? So Ester 3:14 says a copy of the document, paperwork, was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. Kind of scary when you're the head of something and you put out these decrees to kill a certain type of people, you know? So here, Esther agrees to help the Jews. When Mordecai, her uncle, learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, because that's a way that they were shown that they were grieving, and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen, because she's the queen now, was deeply distressed. Then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and to take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai, to learn what and why this was. Why isn't he receiving my gift? Why won't he, put on my new clothes and stuff? And he's refusing. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king to make supplication to him, the king, and plead before him for her people. So Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command from Mordecai. all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews, because she's a Jew, right? For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Have you ever heard that? That we were born for such a time as this. I think it's true. I do. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. And so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. So she was brave. She was willing to lay down her life for all the people. So Esther 5:1, Esther's banquet. Now it happened on the 3rd day, the 3rd day, that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half the kingdom. So Esther answered, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done. Then Esther answered and said, my petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. So here's Haman's plot against Mordecai. So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared, and tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. That was his wife and his friends that gave him that legal advice. What do you think about that? Let's see what happens. In Esther chapter 6, the king honors Mordecai. That night, the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers, who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servant who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's servants said to him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king asked him, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on his head." He's wanting all these things. He's suggesting all these things because he thinks it's for him. So this is how he would want to be treated if he was the one that was getting the reward. "Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor, then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken." So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. Because can you imagine the shame he must have felt? Thinking that he was going to be the one exalted like that. But no, his enemy, the one that he didn't want, that's the one that got honored. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fail, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him." Busted. Oh, they let him know. Boom. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. Let's see what happens next. Haman, oh, that's a spoiler alert. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done." Then Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, Who is he and where is he who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he also assault the queen while I am in the house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang Haman on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. Heavy duty, pride comes before the fall. So you can read the rest of this. It's really good. But the thing is that we want to treat others how we want to be treated, because you never know how things get turned around. When we can come boldly before the throne of grace. But if we're going to be dealing out the wrath, we should hang low, because we stand up straight in pride. It's a lot easier for the weeds to be easily plucked out, because there's no heaviness in those weeds. When you have knowledge about certain things, it's heavy. It causes you to bow low. And so it's important that when we are teaching something or giving our experiences or sharing, we want to treat others how we want to be treated. It's really important. As you could see how this turned out for Haman, he had an enemy because he was not liking that that man wasn't sticking to the letter of the law. That Mordecai had different values inside of his good character. He knew not to bow before others and do idolatry. And that's a problem in our nation, in case you haven't noticed. Some people are getting ready to do some idolatry in their own living room with their tree chopped down. So you can read Jeremiah chapter 9, or chapter 10 rather, about that. The thing is that we need to operate with grace. If we're running our mouth, cussing, blaspheming, and doing all this stuff to one another, it's only going to look bad on us if we do that. So we need to treat others how we want to be treated. And you go to them in private first. You don't bring the witnesses until you go to them in private. If you read Matthew 18:15, it tells us what to do with that. Let me show you. Let me share the screen. Let's see. Let's go. So you can go on blueletterbible.org and let's put in that address, Matthew 18:15. 18:15. So that is the chapter and the verse that I'm addressing. Watch. It says, moreover, if your brother sins against you, if someone crosses your boundaries, or they're coming against really caustic towards you or offending you, if they're crossing your boundaries and they're sinning against you, you go and tell them their fault between you and them alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. But if he will not hear you, you take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector, meaning you're going to avoid those people. So it says right here, assuredly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And again I say to you, that if 2 of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. So that's a promise. So if we want to start to see some action, that's the way to go. That's the proper procedure and the way to go. Not to be doing things deceptively and, secretively and all that kind of stuff. We're going direct. When we're talking to our brethren or a friend or family member, we go direct, and talk to them in private. That's the way to do it. Then if they don't hear you, that's when you get the 2 witnesses. But if they agree with you, then you're good. You're good. You're good to go because they're agreeing with you that, yeah, thank you for that perspective. I'm going to start looking at it that way. And when we're in these groups, there will be some that leave because of misunderstandings, or they leave because nobody's hearing them. But that's not the way to do it. If you are needing to talk to somebody who has, questionable motives or what have you, you go and talk to them privately. Because if you leave the group of people or your tribe or whatever, you really weren't with them in the first place. You were a looky-loo. You might have just been, just let me check out what's going on over here, blah, blah, blah. But if you leave the group or what have you, that's not the right way. That doesn't say to do that in Scripture. If you are claiming to know Scripture or do the right thing, that's not the right way. You go to the one who has offended you and try to work that out. Then you take with you the 2 witnesses privately. Then if they don't hear you, bring it to the whole thing, the group. But after that, then yeah. But you have to be direct and to the point. You can't be beating around the bush, putting out a little feeler here and a feeler there. And I told you. No, you have to be direct. Don't be a coward. Don't be a coward. Go to the one who has offended you and you talk to them. If it works out, then that's good. If you don't wish to have a continuing relationship, that's another story. But if you're going to say that you're here to help the people and help yourself and learn and grow, yeah, you're shortchanging yourself and you're shortchanging the group if you just leave, because it's all about being right, being correct, walking the straight and the narrow way. And sometimes it takes a few more times than just 2 or 3 to get things settled after you've had chaos. And if you were ever in the water under a wave and you don't even know which way is up, ooh, I don't know. You might not be able to make it to shore. You might need somebody life preserver. You might need some help to get you to the shore, to get you to land. So don't think that we need to be a keyboard warrior fighting with people on the keyboard and stuff like that. If there's some issues, take the correction, but don't just leave, because then you're not really with the group in the first place, right? So I hope that this helps people. Anybody out there? There's always going to be an analogy or something that pops up in your life. It could be a family member, friend, a TikTok friend, or somebody, Instagram or Zoom or whatever. It's really important to know that these stories that were written in the Old Testament are for our benefit. So let's grow and learn together. I gotta go because my baby's calling me right now, my little doggy. But hopefully, hopefully we can learn from this. And you can always listen to this over and over again and pick out some of the words that you might have heard. See if it rings true in your spirit. Okay, have a good night.